Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In his weekly radio address today, President Obama marked the second anniversary of the end of U.S. combat operations in Iraq and reminded Americans of the, quote, still difficult work ahead of us in Afghanistan. And more than 5,000 Louisiana residents remain in emergency shelters as the remnants of Isaac move north along the Gulf Coast. But first, my story of the week. America lost. This week, the Republican Party gathered in Tampa to tell a terrible and tragic tale of American decline. They couldn't quite say that explicitly, of course. This is the party of Reagan and sunny optimism, or so they'd like to present themselves. But you couldn't help notice that the 3 days of speeches on the convention floor were an orgy of imagined persecution, grievance, and doleful recollections of halcyon days gone by. The packaging for this message was an insistent invocation of American greatness. As Rachel Maddow's team documented it in a montage for MSNBC's convention coverage, almost every single speaker told a story of upward mobility, usually taken from their own family's past, tracing the arc of the American dream that had brought them to the podium.
My dad got his first job when he was 6 years old.
My dad never finished high school.
Dad was a truck driver.
Dad grew up in poverty.
My dad lost his job.
Mom also came from nothing.
Working poor parents in a meatpacking town.
As a widow with 7 children.
Didn't have much.
Basement apartment.
In a tiny 2-bedroom house.
Pasta and tuna fish.
A single mother.
Working class.
Came from nothing.
She got on a bus.
Took 3 different buses.
Every weekday for years.
Every day to get to work.
Cleaning sheep pens.
A poor farm boy.
Working on the railroad.
A Welsh coal miner.
Mopping floors, waiting tables, tending bar.
They both lived hard lives.
Paycheck to paycheck. $10 in their pockets.
Making 50 cents an hour.
As a teenager with nothing. Not a penny.
And part of this is just standard political treacle, a way for, say, an extremely wealthy prep school graduate like Ann Romney to seem relatable. But the larger reason this was such a dominant theme at the RNC is that the Republican Party's platform and tribal identity are zealously committed to the notion of American exceptionalism. And when people talk about American exceptionalism, this is usually what they mean. The notion that America was different and better than other countries, particularly its ancestors in Europe, precedes America's ascension to the role of sole superpower and global hegemon. That America, unblemished by the legacy of feudalism, a land without nobles and royalty, was a place where each man could rise to any station in life.
America was founded on the principle that every person has God-given rights. Founded on the belief that power belongs to the people. That government exists to protect our rights and serve our interests, and that no one should be trapped in the circumstances of their birth. We should be free to go as far as our talents and our work can take us.
Or, as Mike Huckabee put it,
Our founding fathers left taxation and tyranny, seeking religious liberty, and a society of meritocracy rather than aristocracy.
We should note there is something more than a little odd about the celebration of American meritocracy at a convention convened to nominate a business executive turned governor turned presidential candidate who rose from humble origins as the son of a business executive turned governor turned presidential candidate. A convention that on the same night in which Mike Huckabee decried the aristocracy of foreign lands featured Senator Rand Paul, son of Congressman Ron Paul, uncorking a litany of up by the bootstrap stories shortly before the screening of a video that celebrated the last 2 Republican presidents, one the son of the other who himself was the son of a senator. Somewhat oddly, almost every single one of the stories of we built it plucky American success didn't revolve around the speaker's own experience of social mobility, but rather that of their hardworking relatives and ancestors. It struck me, listening to these invocations of the labors of previous generations, as a slightly odd note, a backward-looking tour of nostalgia for an America that we are losing. But of course, that's precisely the message of the Republican Party this year, and it's a potent one, because it's based on a core reality. The dream of American mobility is slipping away. We all know about the extreme and accelerating inequality, but much less is made of our stagnating, even declining levels of social mobility. Mobility is harder to measure than inequality, but nearly all studies show it has plateaued or declined for the past several decades. 43% of those born into the poorest fifth of households will stay in the poorest fifth, while only 4% will make it to the richest fifth. But 40% of those born into the richest fifth of households stay there, and only 8% fall down to the poorest fifth. In other words, those born rich stay rich, and those born poor stay poor, just like those stultifying bygone aristocracies our forefathers fled. This is the core betrayal that rumbles beneath the surface of our politics, and while the GLP won't put it in those terms, they understand viscerally the unease and anxiety and even desperation it has caused in voters. And they have a story to tell about why it happened. It's not the excesses of global capitalism or American finance or the rigged game of rent-seeking oligopolistic corporate entities who have captured Washington. Instead, it is Barack Obama, who in 3 quick years single-handedly shifted America away from its meritocratic foundations towards an ethos of handouts, welfare, and dependence.
We have a president who wants his party to make us all dependent on government.
Let me give you a government check.
People are dependent on the government.
The number of people on food stamps has increased by 45%.
Obama's waiving of the work requirements and welfare reform.
Creating dependency.
Government handouts and dependency.
Herded into dependency
On the government dole.
Under President Obama, the dream of freedom and opportunity has become a nightmare of dependency.
That's the message. The American dream is dying because the first black president is doling out food stamps and welfare checks to the lazy and indolent. He's seducing Americans into dependence, sapping our natural ingenuity, and in the process making us, in some deep existential sense, less American. It is, of course, ridiculous. First, and most crucially, the decline in social mobility is a trend that started well before Barack Obama took office. It's been part of American capitalism for several decades, and the increase of those using the social safety net simply is not Barack Obama's doing. It's the product of the financial crisis and the Great Recession. In fact, if anything, our safety net has been remarkably stingy. Despite the fact that 2.6 million more people were living in poverty at the end of 2010 than in 2009, only an additional 7,677 people enrolled in TANF, better known as welfare. And aside from one small temporary increase in food stamp eligibility for single people without kids during the worst few months of the recovery, Barack Obama has not expanded food stamp eligibility. In fact, the last 2 expansions of food stamp eligibility came under George W. Bush, one of which rightly restored eligibility for legal immigrants and earned an aye vote from none other than Paul Ryan. So it's not really about the reality of what's happening to this country in this maddeningly disappointing recovery. It's about telling voters that the undeserving are making out like bandits while they're being robbed of their just desserts. For the real subtext of the declaration, "We built it," is, as Clint Eastwood said on the convention's final night to ear-shattering applause, "We own this country." And someone else, someone who's not us, has taken it away, stolen, in the phrasing of Reince Priebus talking about Medicare, and given it to those other people over there. It's an ugly message, but in a time of anxiety and diminished expectations, not a stupid one. Mitt Romney said Thursday he wishes President Obama had succeeded, but that's not how Romney felt in 2009. That's next. On this vampiric weekend after the RNC, we bumped into a little vampire weekend. This morning, I am joined by Bob Herbert, longtime columnist for the New York Times, now a distinguished senior fellow at the progressive think tank Demos. Syndicated columnist David Sirota rejoins us at the table, co-host of the new The Rundown with Sirota and Brown on KHOW Radio in Colorado, contributor to Salon.com, has an amazing new article in Harper's this month we're going to talk about later. Anna Marie Cox, political columnist for The Guardian newspaper, and Josh Barro, lead writer for Bloomberg Views, The Ticker. It is great to have you all here. Anna, welcome to the table.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we had the Republican convention this week. Maybe you saw it. I want to start with the theme of the convention, the "We Built This" theme. Which, if
there was one.
If the goal of the convention was to successfully troll liberals, mission accomplished, because it drove me bonkers. And maybe that was the whole point anyway. Maybe they just like having people like me just want to claw their eyes out every time they hear the invocation. Of course, we know the background, the context. The president was talking about all the infrastructure and elements of the social contract that support the building of businesses. When he says, you know, you've got a business, you didn't build that, he was almost certainly referring to the roads and bridges he had referenced in the earlier clause. It has been intentionally misunderstood. incredibly disingenuously and deceptively by the Republican Party and made into their calling card on.
Well, I was going to say, can anyone think of another example when sort of an off-script moment by a candidate was turned into the theme?
Yeah. What was the theme going to be until he said that? That's what people kept saying on Twitter, like, where all the Republican speechwriters are sitting around being like, I have nothing. I have nothing. And then it was like, he said, we built this, like, yes! Josh.
Well, actually, I can. I think when John Kerry said I actually voted for the $86
yes.
That wasn't their theme, like the official. They didn't have signs that said, I voted for it before I voted against it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
like the theme would have been like, voted for it, still for it.
Yeah, I know. The actual, like, bumper sticker applause line. You know, and that's actually the thing that I was going to say. You noticed there was a theme to the convention. I mean, it was such a haphazard kind of arrangement in a lot of ways. And I've been to a few conventions now, and yes, they're always kind of chaotic. But what I found interesting is that when things got off the rails, the one thing they had to come back to was mocking Obama. I mean, this is what the Eastwood speech to me really meant. Yes, it was a weird moment for a lot of reasons. But what really stuck out to me, and this actually was true of Ryan's speech as well, is that there was these stumbles, this like false footing for a long time. And then once you hit all those cliches
about Obama,
once you start hitting on raising the oceans, we built this, golf. I mean, I don't know, like, then you start to get people to coalesce around it. And I don't know about you guys, but when I talked to actual convention goers, that was the feeling I got.
That's what excited them.
Yeah.
I want to just play, because I do think I think there's two ways of interpreting the convention. There's sort of haphazard ad hoc nature of it symbolized in the 11-minute ad lib from American icon Clint Eastwood, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit. But I actually thought the "We Built This" theme was fairly unified, and the speechwriters did really weave it. Here's just a little montage of "We Built This" drumbeat.
Don't tell me that my parents didn't build their business.
Because we built it.
Yeah, we do build it.
They learned English.
He moved to a small town.
A small hardware store.
One he built by himself, by the way.
Mr. President, they did build it.
No one dared tell Americans you didn't build that.
Mitt Romney was not handed success. He built it. He did build that.
You did build that.
There's the truth. Yes, you did build that.
And that, David, please.
The thing that drives me crazy, and maybe this is a small point, they're inside a publicly funded stadium. There's tens of millions of taxpayer dollars going to. So, in a sense, we built it, but we the people built it. Like they're actually the visual image is actually of the opposite point that they're making. They're either oblivious to it or everybody's oblivious to it, but they're literally sitting in a building that was built by the taxpayers. It proves Obama's point.
You know, I think liberals are laboring here under the misimpression
that it's not an effective message.
That if people listen to that whole speech from Obama in context, that they wouldn't be offended by it and that they would agree with the message. I just think that's wrong. I think, yes, he misspoke and he meant to talk about infrastructure. But what he's saying more broadly in the speech is he's criticizing business people for taking too much credit for their successes. And it's, the part where he's like, I'm always struck when people say, well, I must have been so smart or I must have been so hardworking. People are put off by that. People are put off by the speech played in full context, and they're also put off by the Elizabeth Warren remarks that were basically similar. So I think
they're wrong, but they are. I mean, if you tell people, particularly successful people, if you try, I just wrote a book about the myth of meritocracy, and I got emails from people being like, I'm a good liberal. And, I like your MSNBC show, blah, blah, blah. But don't tell me that I didn't, work hard or I didn't earn what I have. I mean, the idea that it's an extremely core story we tell ourselves about our own success. And I agree, there is something actually radical in a certain way about just stating the obvious fact that it's born of a whole variety of preconditions.
There is a subtext here that's the real theme of the Republican Party. Actually, I just want to make the point that after listening to these well-heeled Republicans, my childhood wasn't that bad. My parents actually made an okay living. But, when they started talking about, I've been saying that the Republican Party has been a party without a theme in this presidential election. But the truth is they've got a theme that they can't speak, and that theme is a racial theme. And when they start talking about you built it or we built it. And when Eastwood starts talking about we own this country, everybody in that hall knows what they're talking about. And it would seem to me that a large part of America knows what they're talking about. They're running against Obama in a painstaking way of trying to paint him as the other. And that is the primary theme of this party. It has been for a long time, but it's really clear this time.
Let me quickly defend another interpretation of the we own this country. The next clause is, just because since we're talking about taking things out of context, it struck me too in that way. But in his defense, the next clause was, politicians work for us. And it was a endorsement of the Republican virtues of self-governance and the fact that leaders should be subservient
I
to
would
the people.
buy that if it wasn't made in the context of every other aspect of this Republican campaign. The birther movement, the suppression of the vote, and on and on and on.
And I just want to point out, it maybe doesn't need to be, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is that not a lot of it is conscious. Some of it is conscious, but not all of it. And I also want to say, to your point, that there is a weakness in Obama. When he does say these things, like, you didn't build that, and he has this, the reason why I think he gets conservatives so riled up is not just because he's the other, although I think that plays a part of it, is that he is intellectual and distant and kind of condescending. That is our president's real weakness when it comes to communicating with voters.
And I think I think he has moments of condescension. I don't think that's a main thrust of him rhetorically, but I think that's a weakness.
I think that's what they pick up on in that particular phrase.
But we built this thing. You have to think of in the context of their portrayal of Obama as the president of welfare, the food stamp president. They keep talking about the people who work so hard. Right. We did it, and the implicit message is that they are lazy, they don't work for a living, they want these government handouts.
And that's why if you put it into the context of the nostalgia and how there was a lot of the Reagan language, and Reagan, of course, was the guy who campaigned against welfare queens. I think that when you look at what they're pining for, to go backwards it's not spoken, it may not even be conscious, but we have an African-American president, and we want to go back to a time where
we didn't.
Where we didn't, but where African-Americans, where people of color, where the other didn't have power.
Josh?
I think you need to be careful not to overstate this. I think there are obvious appeals to racial resentment in the Republican campaign this cycle and in previous cycles, and I think the best example of that is the basically completely made-up attack on welfare reform.
Yeah.
And I think that the objective there is to foster this idea. And I got emails on this weekend, including I basically got a guy fired from his job as a corporate executive who sent me a really racist email in response to.
Tell me this. Will you hold that thought? I want you to tell this story because I think it's a really interesting one. Okay. And then I want you to tell us to not impute too much to racial animus right after we take this break. All right, we're talking about the we built this theme of the convention, and Josh, you had a story that you tweeted about in the context of talking about let's not overread the subtext of this theme as necessarily one predicated on racial animus of white folks towards the first African American president. I want you to tell the story and then circle back to defending that view.
Right. Well, first of all, we should read the theme. The theme is there, and so I wrote this critical piece on Paul Ryan's speech, and I got an email the next morning that opens by asking me whether I was performing certain sexual acts on the president, and then goes on and basically says, what Obama and his handlers is what their real goal is to take the money away from us and give it to, and he uses a racial slur for black people, and then to the gays and the lesbos. And I don't know, I haven't gotten my check, but and then I see, this email isn't from some random person. It's from the business email account of a senior manager at a major real estate investment trust. And so I respond to it and I copy their VP for communications and basically say, I don't think you should send emails full of racial slurs to reporters from your work email. And I got an email. They fired the guy very, very quickly. So the company handled it very appropriately. But
so you were saying about there not being a racial subtext?
No, there is a racial subtext, and that's very real. And I think a lot of conservatives are in denial of that. But then on the other hand, what you had on your network this week, you had Lawrence O'Donnell and Martin Bashir talking about the golf stuff. And Martin Bashir asks about it, and Lawrence O'Donnell says, well, this is an attempt to tie the president to Tiger Woods and his skirt chasing, basically. It's no, that's not what the golf stuff is. This is an attack that goes all the way back to Dwight Eisenhower, and it's always nonsense, sort of attacking the opposite party president for not working hard enough. But the golf thing is not about the president being black. So it's possible to look at this and look at everything the Republicans say and read a racial angle into it. And in fact, the Republicans have, lots of objections to the president, only some of which relate to racial resentment, and they also have very real substantive policy disagreements. And so I think you need to be careful not to go overboard and sort of assume that every objection to the president, or at least more of them than actually are related to his race.
And part of the problem, I think, when we're doing this kind of textual analysis of the themes, is that there's no scientific test we can put up, right? I mean, we're essentially trying to, there's no counterfactual to run against. I mean, there is the Bill Clinton, although he was racialized in certain ways too, as Ta-Nehisi pointed out.
And you can't poll people about this.
Right, yeah, right.
And that's actually, I was going to make the point that also we don't know what of these racial resentments work in terms of swing voters out there or anyone who's voting for or against the president.
Although I would say this, the welfare ads have proliferated.
Come on,
they keep getting run. So I think they're working.
I think, who are they working on? I mean, they've already, and this is actually one of the really confounding things about this particular campaign that I'm sure all of us have noted, is that when are they going to stop appealing to the base?
Right.
When are they going to stop pandering to the base? Because I don't believe that there are a lot of swing voters out there who sit there and who their main concern is the economy. They aren't particularly resentful of Obama.
Yeah.
Who are hearing these, sort of racially coded attacks and thinking, that's going to sway me.
And Karl Rove said this in this presentation that was captured by Business Week when he's talking to American Crosswords, basically saying swing voters, Obama voters who we have to win, like the president. And I think actually, let me turn to the Mitt Romney speech, because I think that's the first time that we saw a real, genuine appeal to not the base, right? That speech is so here's first of all Romney talking about his own up by the bootstrap story. Take a look.
I grew up in Detroit in love with cars and wanted to be a car guy like my dad. But by the time I was out of school, I realized that I had to go out on my own. That if I stayed around Michigan in the same business, I'd never really know if I was getting a break because of my dad. I wanted to go someplace new and prove myself.
I was out on my own is a great line. The place that he went to, which was not mentioned in that speech and wasn't mentioned in the bio video, and I was sitting there tweeting, "You're cutting out a main part," was Harvard University, where he went to get a law degree. By the way, note to Clint Eastwood, who said lawyers shouldn't be presidents, where he went to get a law degree and an MBA. He enrolled in the Harvard Law and Harvard Business School. That's what's going on.
Striking out.
When they exactly, it's like a frontiersman.
What he meant was that his parents were not in the dorm.
Right, that's right. That's right. But then, so that I think was the kind of the relatable part of it. Then the next part of the speech, in terms of talking to Obama voters, I thought this was the most effective line in the whole speech. And this is him talking about your again, like thinking of speaking to precisely the Obama, your regrets or your disappointment with the president. Take a look.
Hope and change had a powerful appeal. But tonight, I'd ask a simple question. If you felt that excitement when you voted for Barack Obama, shouldn't you feel that way now that he's President Obama? You know there's something wrong with the kind of job he's done as president when the best feeling you had was the day you voted for him.
Well, I agree with you, Chris. I think that was the most effective line in the speech, and that's why I think the Republican Party is making a mistake. I don't know how this election will turn out, but I think that there's a better path for them to have followed. Obama is so vulnerable. There's a great deal of disappointment even on the left with Barack Obama. Everybody knows the economy is in trouble. I assumed that Romney was going to pivot towards the center, the old cliche, after he got the nomination, but he didn't. Mm-hmm. If they had pounded the table on economy and jobs, mm-hmm. he would have made his business background that much more of an advantage. And we were talking about this in the green room, just like the Democrats very often look at labor or look at liberals and say, well, they have nowhere else to go. Well, the right wing of the Republican Party has nowhere else to go either, and I think that would have been a better path.
I think he did. I think he did pivot a little bit. I mean, I do think
he pivoted a little bit in that speech. But basically, with Paul Ryan and with the way that he has run this campaign so far, it's not that big of a pivot.
Let me also say, there's a lot of people out there who people that have health insurance that didn't have health insurance, people that are working for car companies that would have closed, people that are on who got a government contract for the Recovery Act, who the best day wasn't the day they voted for Obama. I just want to
lesbians in the military.
Gays and lesbians in the military. David, I want to get your thoughts. I'm just going to take a quick break. David Cerulli, your thoughts on it?
Well, my point when we were talking about what kind of candidate Mitt Romney is in the general election is I guess I didn't expect it, but I thought it would have been a good move had he pivoted to I'm Governor Mitt Romney. That is, look at my record in Massachusetts where he could have, I guess he's already criticized Obama's health care bill. He can't take it as his own, but here's some things I did on health care. Here's some things I did on going after corporate tax loopholes. Here are some things that are actually moderate and appealing and technocratic about what I can do as president. And we haven't really seen that pivot. And I think that's a fundamental shift in Republican politics long term, that we're not seeing Republican candidates necessarily turn back to a middle. And in the case of Romney, he actually has somewhat of a moderate record to turn back to, as opposed to just rhetoric.
Right.
I don't know. This might be the last gasp of the dog whistle, if I can mix metaphors powerfully, because I don't think this is working for them.
You're dying there, but then you have a dog whistle in your throat.
Yeah.
And so that works.
Okay, I'm not going to whistle because I think that this is not working. I mean, whatever they're doing right now, is not actually working. He should be, the way things are in the economy and with Obama, how he's looking, this should not be a difficult, fight for Romney. He should be doing much better than he is, I think. And yet he keeps going back to the base, keeps going back to the base, keeps going back to the base. And he keeps on trying to do this thing where he's hitting Obama, yet trying to be relatable and likable. He's not that candidate.
I sort of disagree a little bit in that, the polls are basically deadlocked. I think if we saw there's a seal of favorability bump out of this, we'll probably see some polling bump. The other thing is beating an incumbent president is hard. I mean, as bad as the economy is, the things have gotten better, relative to where they were. The incumbent is the incumbent, and Barack Obama is an incredibly able politician. He's very well liked among the electorate, and that is why the other two-step they're doing is this two-step of you liked him, he's a perfectly good guy. Here's the I wanted him to succeed line, which I thought was part of this whole theme. I'm not against I'm not against him personally. I wanted the best. We all wanted the best for him. Here he is saying he wished the president had succeeded.
I wish President Obama had succeeded because I want America to succeed.
I can't help but note that in 2009, it was a little bit of a different message about Obama's success. Take a look.
I want liberal policies to fail. I want him to fail in trying to put in place a health care plan that takes away the private sector from health care. I want him to fail in his cap and trade program as long as China and Brazil and Indonesia aren't going to play in it. But I want him to succeed as a president, meaning I want him to succeed in strengthening our economy, keeping us free, bringing our troops home in success from Iraq and Afghanistan. But I don't want his liberal policies to succeed.
But to Anna Marie's point, it's not just that the election is close, and I agree that it's difficult to oust an incumbent president. But Romney is so far behind among women. He is so far behind among Latinos. And even with the black vote, where Obama's always going to get the overwhelming majority of the black vote, I never saw
strong political prediction.
I never saw a poll before where a national poll where somebody got 0% of the vote, and he got 0% of the African American vote. There's no reason for even a Republican candidate to do that poorly with those three groups.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be interested to see in the Democratic convention coming up this week, because I thought the strongest part of Romney's speech was the disappointment, the expression disappointment in Obama's failure. And I think also in the Paul Ryan speech, which I thought substantively was basically mendacious. There was this one great image, though, of the college student,
the faded poster
fading, and he can't find a job. This is exactly the right line of attack for them, and I think that's especially because the president's message is basically 4 more years of the same. regime. He hasn't laid out anything clear about what they're going to do differently in a second term than they would do in a first term that I think would respond to those sorts of concerns about, well, we elected you 4 years ago and we haven't gotten what we're looking for. I think Anna Marie's right that, you know, on social policy and on certain other areas there are constituencies that are satisfied with what they've gotten. But I think the percentage of people who are basically satisfied with the president's handling of the economy is small, even on the left.
And let me say this though. I mean, the core. David, go ahead. Sorry.
Here's an interesting comparison. Is that when Democrats are running against a bad economy, they can go to their base on an economic message because the base actually matches with the economic grievance of the whole country. Yeah. Mitt Romney is trying to essentially make this into a 1992 Bill Clinton, or that's what he should be doing when it comes to the economy. He goes to his base, but in order to go to the Republican base, what you're going to them with is not something that necessarily matches with what the whole country wants. You have to go to them on hardcore immigration policies, hardcore social policies, et cetera, et cetera. You have to go to them to try to mobilize them in a way that alienates the larger swath of America.
Or you go to them on never cutting Medicare for anything ever.
This is right. This is why they do that, and this is why they basically make up the welfare attack. I mean, welfare reform was a very popular policy, and still is. And if the president were, in fact, trying to gut the work requirement in welfare, that would be a huge political gift to Romney, because it's not like welfare reform is just an issue for the Republican base. That was one of Newt Gingrich's famous 60-40 issues, where the Republican side really was broadly popular in the middle. So I think that's...
And the whole Medicare thing, Romney going to his base saying, I want to protect Medicare, that's not exactly a base mobilizing strategy for Mitt Romney.
And to make an economic argument to his base, that's why this nostalgia is so important. Because this bootstrap idea is so important, because it has to be like, okay, yeah, you're struggling now, but someday you'll be rich like me and you'll benefit from the tax cuts that I'm giving to rich people. You know?
The focus of the speech and of the convention was domestic policy because of the primacy of the economy. But I thought the foreign policy stuff was gobsmacking. I mean, really, the platform and everything. And the only moment of remarkable subversion of that came from Clint Eastwood right after this.
I think you mentioned something about having a target date for bringing everybody home, and you give that target date, and I think Mr. Romney asked the only sensible question, and he says, "Why are you giving the date out now? Why don't you just bring them home tomorrow morning?"
Wherein Clint Eastwood gets the Republican National Convention audience to cheer bringing the troops home from Afghanistan tomorrow morning. The Eastwood thing is so... I don't even want to talk about it. It's so bizarre, and we've chewed it over a little bit in the last few days, and I really thought it was disrespectful. And I mean, I'm not like a big, respect the president, but like... talking this down to a chair like you're lecturing a schoolboy and implying that he just was, I found it vulgar and disrespectful and just gross and
a caricature of Obama that doesn't even ring true for anyone that's even seen him a little bit, which usually good comedy is based in truth.
I just want to, I don't want to sift through it. I thought it was bizarre and disrespectful and insulting in kind of a deep core way. That said, the Afghanistan line was fascinating to me, and the reason it was fascinating to me was the sheer 200-proof neocon bellicosity of the last part of the Romney speech. Of all the things to end your speech on, when you're talking, I mean, to go into this reverie about all the places that you want to basically start something with. Check out how this sounded.
America, he said, had dictated to other nations. No, Mr. President, America has freed other nations from dictators. He has failed to slow Iran's nuclear threat, thrown allies like Israel under the bus, abandoned our friends in Poland. We will honor America's democratic ideals because a free world is a more peaceful world. That America, that united America, will preserve a military that's so strong no nation would ever dare to test it.
So that's the message from the Romney people. Clint Eastwood gets everyone to cheer. We have 87,000 troops in Afghanistan right now, bringing them home tomorrow morning, and not one mention of Afghanistan in the entire speech. If a Democratic president had gotten up and given a nominating speech at a convention and not made one mention of the current war in which we are engaged, that would be the Drudge headline, the Fox headline. That would have dominated the entire coverage. That would have been everything. I was flabbergasted.
Well, you were saying, like, you missed the days where the Republicans were the non-whining party. Like, I missed the days where they respected the troops. Like, we got nothing, really, in terms of, like, even, like, that we complain sometimes on the left about the right using troops as props. But that shows some form of acknowledging that they're out there risking their lives, maybe on a fool's errand, but, you know, but they're out there, they're doing what they're doing their jobs, they're protecting our country, they're protecting the ideals of our country. And this was a remarkably free of that. Even, you know, and also I was going to say Condoleezza Rice's speech was, I think, the big headline out of the convention for me. I mean, it was a remarkable speech, but it was a litany of, like, all the places we're going to go to war.
But it doesn't fit. The Afghanistan issue doesn't fit into their larger message of we have to go back. We have to go back to what we want to go back to. Whatever it is. I think the rest of it, that montage you played of what we're going to do going forward, that goes through the prism of to restore American preeminence. This is what we have to do. Barack Obama has supposedly destroyed American preeminence. And what we got a reference to, he went around and he supposedly apologized to people, apologized to the world. I think...
Which he didn't, we should say. He did not. That's like the welfare claim. It's ridiculous.
Right. But the point is that if you see everything through, we have to go back to before this time when this president, who is the other, is trying to make us the other, then everything makes sense.
But this convention was completely a reality-free zone, you know, and that part of Romney's speech was just crazy and filled with lies. I mean, you know, you just mentioned the idea of Obama going around apologizing and that sort of thing, but this idea that the Obama administration has thrown Israel under the bus is really, it's a canard. It's absolutely disgusting, untrue. You know.
I just don't buy Romney as like a bellicose guy who's going to get us involved in a lot of wars. I just, you know, I mean, I had a little bit of exposure to him when I worked for his running mate when they were running for governor and lieutenant governor in 2002. And I think the idea of him as, you know, the management consultant leader is basically correct. And I think, you know, I think he has to view this stuff as a time and money suck. I can't imagine that he wants to spend his presidency dealing with some other war in the Middle East.
I think this is the best point because also if you mention Afghanistan, you get into how much this all costs. And you get that debt clock at the back.
Right, and why is that clock
so big?
But I want to disagree with that strongly because I used to think that, but I now think
there's nothing like a convert.
Well, here's the thing. I watched, watching the Democratic Party in healthcare, for instance. Okay, remember the debate? That was the single policy, the huge policy difference between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton was the mandate. Right. It was the mandate. Yep. And we literally had hour-long debates about the mandate, okay? What happens? Barack Obama got into office. They proposed a health care plan with the mandate. The reason for that is that the essentially think tank policy circles of the Democratic Party had a plan with the mandate. That was what mattered. It was already baked into the cake. Reading the platform and seeing who runs foreign policy, who are the people around Mitt Romney, it is the architects of the entire neocon era of endless war of the last decade. And that's what matters more than the preferences, beliefs, technocratic, whatever. I really think that strongly.
There's not a space right now, I guess, perceptually for Mitt Romney to actually make the argument that he might make, which is the argument that Clint Eastwood would make, which would be a different argument on foreign policy.
He could make that argument, but he's not.
I think there's a place in the Republican Party for it, and somebody needs to make it, but I don't think he perceives that there's a constituency.
We're going to go around the table and get how many wars Mitt Romney will start right after this break. Since Mitt Romney mentioned dictators in that speech, I think we should just mention that the years of the Obama presidency, and I don't think this is necessarily due to President Obama, in some cases not, clearly not due to him, but it hasn't been a good run for dictators. I mean, we should just note that in the Obama administration, Tunisia President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, Libyan ruler Muammar Gaddafi, Yemen President Ali Abdullah Saleh, Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo, and former Burmese military rulers have also given way to democratic elections. So I think the point there is that maybe going around the world starting bad wars strengthens dictators, and actually a foreign policy environment which the U.S. isn't enmeshed in those might give some space to the natural constituencies that are laboring underneath tyranny to rebel in a civic fashion and not have to worry about, say, the demagoguery of those dictators railing against the American enemy, who seems like actually a plausible possible foe when they're occupying a country very close to you.
Yeah. Bad wars are not good for any leaders. Witness LBJ and Vietnam. Witness George W. Bush and Iraq. Anybody who is president or wants to be president of the United States ought to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I take exactly the opposite lesson that you do from the history of the mandate and President Obama. I think he ran against a mandate because that was politically a wise thing for him to do, and it helped him separate himself in the Democratic primary from his two opponents. And I think he implemented it because that was a wise thing to do policy-wise. The healthcare framework he had didn't work without a mandate. You could have done a single-payer plan, except that you couldn't politically do it. So if you took this approach, you had to have the mandate. So I think it makes sense for Romney to sound as hawkish as possible in order to please elements in the Republican base. But then when you look at his planning for presidency, he tapped Robert Zellick to be in charge of his transition on foreign policy. Zellick is within the Republican Party considered within the realist/dovish contingent. The neoconservatives are very unhappy about this choice. We don't know who he's actually going to put in the administration if he gets elected, but I think that it would be a very Romney thing to do, to use rhetoric as a substitute for actual costly policy.
You mean that would be
absolutely. Josh is pro flip-flop. You're on the record as being pro flip-flop, although you may change your mind.
If your position is bad, then yes,
right, that's the Keynes line, right? Oh, well, I changed my mind in the face. What else you? I should also note, just because we ran through that list, the American government, both under George W. Bush and very much under Obama, was explicitly colluding with Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen. So I don't want to give too. I mean, we have sent drones there, we've sent cruise missiles to Yemen that have killed civilians. I don't want to give too much credit to the president or the American power in bringing down Ali Abdullah Saleh when he was a key ally that we've been sort of.
I do think it's frightening that we know the least amount about Mitt Romney's foreign policy when a president has the most power over foreign policy out of anything.
I agree. Can the political media go from mildly debunking false assertions to flat out calling someone a liar? Better yet, what happens if they do and no one cares? That's up next.